Have you ever wanted to visit another planet? Have you ever wanted to see alien life forms with your own eyes? Well, unfortunately, that won't be possible for some time, if ever. But the closest you can get to that experience now is to go to Socotra Island off the coast of Yemen. What's so special about that island, you might ask? Well, a quick search on the internet will answer most of your questions. Go to images. Pictures speak 1,000 words, as the saying goes. But if you don't want to Google it, I'll describe it here. Imagine trees that look like mushrooms, and if you cut into them, they bleed red. Imagine a poisonous tree whose bark is tied around herd animals to ward off predators, which also doesn't need any soil to grow. That thing can root itself directly onto rocks. I can count all 300-ish species endemic to the island, which cannot be found anywhere else on the planet. But I'd be writing this all day. A bit of background on myself. I'm a botanist. I specialize in the study of plants. To be specific, I specialize in plant ecology. Plant ecology, in layman's terms, is the study of how plant life is distributed in the ecosystem, how they interact and between other living plants and organisms, as well as how they shape the local environment. Back in 2010, I was working on my paper focused on the ecology of Socotra Island as part of my PhD. So, during the summer of that year, I decided to visit the island itself. Seeing the local flora firsthand is about as good as it gets, and I'll most likely get bonus points on the paper. But of course, it wasn't all about the PhD. I wanted to visit the island to see the frankly alien landscape. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I began my journey by going to Cairo, Egypt. There, I took a layover flight to Sayoun, then directly to Socotra Airport. The whole flight lasted for about 4 to 4.5 hours. I was a bit tired from the flight once I landed. To make a long story short, I conducted some research there and saw the famous dragon's tree myself, bleeding and all. I'll save you from the details of the research and the paper. It isn't important in the story. The island is a marvel, an alien one, but I'm not sure whether or not the plants originated from Earth or not. That is silly of me to say. Genetic evidence shows that they are related to other plant life on the planet in one way or another. But I started to question that after I departed homeward. Now, once all was said and done, I decided to enjoy my remaining time on the island. I wanted to explore all the nooks and crannies of the place. Now, another fun fact, the island has quite an extensive cave system despite its relatively small size. The longest cave was about 3 kilometers in length, and that was one of the caves I visited. It was called the Hawk Cave. I and a few other tourists were guided by one of the locals to the cave, and we explored it for a bit. It was absolutely marvelous, gigantic too. I felt as if I was in a naturally formed cathedral when I was in there. Large pillars of stone went high above us, the light slowly fading as we went deeper inside, though we didn't go too deep. The local guide, let's call him Amir, that's not his real name. I'll withhold his real name for privacy's sake. He was a fantastic guide and a fantastic person as well. Spoke excellent English as well. During my stay, he was the man who took me to any place of interest during my work, as well as took us caving. He and I grew quite close. He was an interesting guy to talk to. He was talkative and had many interesting stories to tell. I remember on the drive back, I was on the passenger seat. There were 2 other German tourists in the back. Though they mainly conversed among themselves for the duration of the journey, only asking Amir a few questions here and there. I remember the conversation quite vividly, at least one part of it. That was quite a sight back there, I chuckled. Amir smiled and replied. It was, he said, turning the radio down a little bit. Just out of curiosity, are there any other caves like this here, or any other interesting places? My flight's in 2 days. I'm sorry I'm a nuisance, I said. Amir thought for a few moments before replying, Well, there is one place. It is interesting, not so much for the view, but the stories about it, he said. What kind of stories? I asked. The older people tell us of how the place is cursed. Many people disappeared, never to return. I heard some did, but they were not the same, not themselves anymore. Though I don't believe any of that is true. If you. He was cut off by a laugh from the passenger behind us. You can take us with you. You say cursed place? It sounds interesting. One of the people behind us said, No, no, those are just stories to scare little children. There's nothing interesting up there other than a small cave. I've been there myself and haven't found anything interesting. Well, nothing you haven't seen already, Amir said, turning his head a few times to look at the passengers behind him. Oh, if you say so, one of the passengers said, resuming their conversation in their native language. Other than the chatter of the two people in the back seat and the music playing on the radio, we were silent for the remainder of the drive back to civilization. Once we finally arrived back at the hotel, I and the rest of the passengers exited the car. Once I grabbed my bag, I was about to close the door before Amir began to speak. Do you want me to drive you to that place? It's not far from here. No, it's getting late. I wouldn't want you to drive me to some little cave in the countryside, I said. Look, my friend, it's on me. No need to pay. It's not far from here. 20-minute drive, maybe less. I started to have my suspicions at that moment. It was getting late, and he was offering to drive me in the middle of nowhere for free. This sounded like some sort of setup, I know, and I knew that then. But something told me he was being genuine and had no ill intent. He was a great guide thus far, and I was now really curious. I sighed, put my bag back inside, and entered the passenger seat once again. Once I entered, he started driving. Where did that come from? I asked. What? Well, driving me to an, as you said, uninteresting place for free? Ah, that. Once you asked me about any other places, I remembered the small cave just outside the city. Though it isn't anything, what's the word? Spectacular. It does have a different aura. Since you reminded me, and you seem curious, I should take you there and see it. All right, now you've piqued my curiosity, I said. The rest of the drive was a short one. Once we got out of the city, we started going along a winding dirt road for about 10 minutes. The sun began to set slowly on the horizon as we arrived at the place. He stopped abruptly on the dirt road before saying, We are here. We exited the car and he pointed toward the hills. It's up there. Follow me. I followed him up. We hiked for some time. I felt anxious. I was looking at him for any signs of movement that might indicate something was off. I tried to pay it no mind, but that was soon the least of my problems. I started to feel the aura he described. It was more of a feeling of impending doom, that something was not right, but you couldn't place your finger on it. And it was on him. I could see that he felt the same way. He was looking around the hills as I was. It was as if something was watching our every move with each step we took. "Did we reach the cave?" I asked. "Yes, it is here. Get up here," he said as he pointed in front of him. Once I got up the hill, I could see the cave he was talking about. It wasn't small, as he previously said, not as large as the one we visited. Medium sized, I would say, but not in the least small. The opening was big enough to fit a large bus inside with room to spare. From the vantage point of the hill, it seemed ominous. The little sun that there still was blocked by the hill. The cave was in the shade, though it wasn't too dark still, and if it does get dark, I brought a flashlight with me, thankfully. The anxiety I felt only grew once I saw it, but the weird thing was, I didn't want to leave. I wanted to go inside for some absurd reason. I couldn't really tell why. I felt attracted to the cave, as if it was beckoning me inside. Can we get a bit closer?" I said. Amir looked at me as if I was insane before saying, "Do as you would like. Just don't go inside. You will get lost. God forbid." "I'll be right behind you," he said. I simply nodded before starting to slowly descend the hill toward the cave opening. Once I got down there, I looked back to see Amir still there, waving to me. "Don't be long." I gave him a thumbs up before going closer. With each step, I felt as if that aura was getting stronger and stronger. Before I knew it, I entered the cave itself. It was pitch black inside. For some reason, I didn't need to reach for my flashlight. It was like I knew where I was going. I could hear shouting behind me, Amir most likely, but his voice was muffled by the stone around me. Soon enough, I saw a light at the other end, an opening. I followed the light, tripping on a couple of stone protrusions along the way. As I exited the cave, I was met by light, a lot of light. The other weird thing, after I took the first breath after getting out, I felt lightheaded. The way you feel when you hyperventilate, when you have too much oxygen in your bloodstream. I felt dizzy. I also felt much lighter, as if I lost 20 or 30 kilos the moment I stepped out. My entire body felt light, so light. Once my vision adjusted, I could see that it was midday. The sun was high above, well, the suns. There were two of them. One was orangish and about the same size as our own sun in the sky, while the other was smaller and had a blue hue. I rubbed my eyes a couple of times, thinking it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but no, they weren't. The second thing I realized just then was the color purple. The sky had a purplish color to it. The grass, the plants, the tree leaves were all purple. I recognized the trees. They looked like the dragon trees I researched and saw myself, but these were taller, much taller. The average dragon tree grew between 5 to 10 meters in height, but these towered to at least 20 to 25 meters, maybe even more. The vegetation was much denser than I had previously thought. Well, on Socotra at least. "Amir! Amir!" I started shouting. I was hyperventilating at this point. I never had any breathing problems before. I have no history of asthma. This was probably just panic. The fact that my chest started to hurt didn't help in any way as well. I sat down on the ground to catch my breath, but it was difficult. After a few minutes of trying to breathe properly, I managed to find a tactic to not hyperventilate. I didn't take in a full breath. I needed to breathe shallowly if you will. But despite that, my lungs seemed satisfied with the air intake. I needed to be conscious of my breathing. It was difficult, but I managed. Once I got my act together, I looked around my vicinity to get a better look. Though my eyes felt slightly irritated, I'm pretty sure my eyes weren't lying. This wasn't Socotra for sure. I looked behind me to see the cave missing. I tried not to panic again, as to have another episode of hyperventilation. I tried my best to remain as calm as possible. Amir, are you there? I shouted once again, but no answer. I started to walk back, well, in the direction where the cave would be. There was a steep hill where it was, where I swear the opening I came through was. I decided to climb it, and surprisingly, it was much easier than I thought it would have been. I did feel much lighter for some reason. After a few minutes of climbing up the steep hill, purple grass and strange flowers brushed my legs nearly to my knees at some point. I finally got up there. What I saw, Jesus, it was a sight that was right out of a movie. A vast plain dotted with all kinds of life that I'd never seen before. Most of it was purple, but I saw yellow bushes. I saw red flowers in bloom that towered over the grass dotted across the land. Some of the trees seemed familiar to the ones I saw, but others were completely different. One of the trees I saw, only a couple seemed to be at the very least 50 meters tall. They had a white and almost translucent trunk with branches going haphazardly in every direction. Its leaves were pinkish, and it had a crimson red flowerings on its branches. Even from a distance, I can discern that they looked akin to roses. I couldn't take the sight in completely before my eyes were averted to a dust cloud that was rising in the distance. There was a clearing in the trees where I saw a herd of animals. They looked like giraffes with long, thin necks. But, unlike the giraffes that we know, they seemed to be white. I couldn't tell if they had fur or not. They were running from something. I couldn't see it. I took a single step forward to get a better look and slipped. I went tumbling down the hill. It felt as if I was falling in slow motion. It was a steep hill, but I should have been at the bottom much quicker. I, fortunately, was relatively unscathed by the unfortunate fall, but I had another problem now. A large plant, yellow leaves and a purple trunk. It was tall and had a massive unblossomed flower at the top. I could easily sit inside of it if it blossomed. I know that because it did blossom. Well, opened up when I fell right beside it. Once it did, I saw that it had teeth, rows upon rows of sharp, translucent teeth. Its saliva dripped to the ground, dissolving the grass where it fell like a strong acid. Its head slowly inched closer to me as I backed off as quickly as I could. Once I got to my feet, it lunged at me, extending its internode trunk to get closer to me. I barely avoided its mouth. Merely inches from me, it quickly closed in. Thankfully, it didn't catch me, but some of its saliva did burn through my pants. I got up and ran away as far as I possibly could from that monster, but I was not in the clear yet. I didn't realize I crossed quite the distance without getting winded. I realized that because the dust cloud of the giraffe-looking creatures was not too far away when I looked to the left. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I muttered to myself as I braced for the worst. I saw the towering creatures close the distance at a remarkable speed, and before I knew it, I was right in the middle of their stampede of dozens of creatures that would dwarf even some dinosaurs. I got on the ground and hoped, prayed to every deity I knew of to let me live. I could hear their massive hooves trample the ground around me. Some of them stepped over me as I awaited my fate, but soon enough they passed by me, somehow not stepping on me. When I lifted my head again, I could see the purple grass around me was trampled, and some parts of the ground had ripped off, letting me see the dirt that seemed to be a much more light brown than I would expect. I got up on my feet, hyperventilating once again. After a moment of trying to calm myself down, again I saw another problem. The things chasing the stampede of skyscrapers with four legs. Some of them passed me by, but two of them stopped, looking at me as their new prey. They looked like big cats, cheetahs. They had a lean build and were quite large, larger than a lion. They were also white, and they had four black eyes and no fur. On their necks, they had what resembled gills that vibrated when they growled in a deep and disturbing tone. They started to circle me. I felt cornered. Before I could think of anything, one of them jumped at me with mind-boggling speed. I managed to dodge. The thing jumped a good 20 damn meters with no problem. I could only imagine how high they could jump, but this was not the time to theorize. I had to think quickly. I turned my gaze to the ground, finding a simple stick to fend off these predators. Then I had a stupid idea. I had a lighter with me. In hindsight, lighting a stick on fire with a lighter isn't a quick way to make a large enough fire to scare off predators. But in the state of mind in which I was, it seemed a logical idea. Lady Luck was on my side because in that world, things burned very easily. The moment I struck the lighter near the stick, it lit up in flames. I nearly burned my eyebrows off. It burned like a torch in mere seconds. I waved the burning stick around, shouting as loud as I could. The predator seemed apprehensive then, flinching each time I pointed the burning stick toward them. But one of them was braver than the other, attempting to lunge at me while I had my eye on the other for a split second. Reflexively, I managed to punch it in the face. How I did that, I couldn't tell you. My reflexes seemed superhuman when I think back on it. It did much more damage than I anticipated. The animal fell to the ground whimpering. I looked at the other one, which was backing off now. I reacted quickly once again, plunging the burning stick into one of the gills of the predator I punched to the ground. The fire seemed to burn with even more intensity once I stuck it in there. The predator whimpered and screeched in pain. I saw the other one run off. I got the stick out of the gill, the creature still whimpering on the ground. I backed off, throwing the makeshift torch on the ground. I ran as fast as I could back to the hill. As I went through the brush and tall grass, I saw a cave entrance. I needed shelter. I needed a way out. I needed to wake up. I sprinted toward the cave, jumping over a rock along the way, and I jumped a good 4 meters in the air, nearly gliding through the air toward the entrance. Once I got inside, I had too much momentum. I tripped on a something and fell, hitting my head hard onto a hard surface. Blackness took over my vision. I heard a familiar sound, a voice calling me, calling my name. "Hey, are you awake? Wake up!" My hearing was muffled. I could barely hear what he was saying. "Wake up!" My hearing returned, and I opened my eyes. My lungs burned, and I coughed as if someone had saved me from drowning. Oh, thank God, Amir said in relief, before probably saying a few prayers in his native language. You all right? God, you disappeared in the dark, and I couldn't find you. Where did you go? Amir asked me. I I don't know. No, no, come here. Let's go back. Come on, I'll help you up, he said as he helped me get up. I felt heavy now. I could barely walk. He had to carry me up and downhill to the car. During the drive back, he asked me what happened. I told him I probably tripped and hit my head. Though my head did hurt, there seemed to be no injuries. He took me to a clinic just in case. They determined I was more or less fine. I just had a few bruises on my arms and legs, not anything major. He drove me back to the hotel and told me to call him if I needed a ride to the airport, free of charge. He was apologetic after what happened. He blamed himself for basically dragging me there with no good reason. Though it was no fault of his own, I was the idiot going into a dark cave without any light source. It could have been worse. I thought at the time that I was just out of it, that my head injury conjured up some fever dream while I was unconscious. But the very next day, when I felt a bit better, I saw that there were a couple of holes in my pants that seemed as if something burned through them. I also had a few burn marks on my legs where the holes were. Did the doctors overlook that yesterday? I don't know. The other thing was that my lighter was missing. I probably dropped it somewhere in the cave, I thought. During the day, I had an aching feeling in my hand. I showered. It didn't help. Neither did scratching. If anything, it made it worse. After I looked closer at it, I realized it was a splinter. I took some tweezers to get it out, and after a while I managed to do that. It went quite deep into my hand. My hand was relieved of most of the aching, but that splinter didn't look like any wood I knew. Its color was off. It was white, translucent, nearly see-through.